The morning sun rose over Greenvale, glinting off the dew that clung to the wheat like secrets waiting to be told. Elias stood by his fence, watching his neighbors toil, his eyes sharp with quiet envy. Beneath his calloused fingers, he crumpled a seed he had bought from the old woman, Mara, who had warned, "Truth feeds what you sow." But Elias never believed in warnings, only in profit. When Jonas asked about the strange brown spots on his crops, Elias smiled and lied. Said a blight was spreading, said it would ruin everything. And as Clara overheard and panic took root, Elias felt powerful. Yet, as he turned away, the wind rustled the wheat in a whisper that chilled him. What happens when a lie becomes the only truth you live in? Is wealth worth losing your soul or your peace? The breeze seemed to answer, carrying his deceit across the fields. Days later, panic spreads through Greenvale. Farmers speak of dying crops and cursed winds, each rumor seeded by Elias's tongue. He watches them gather near the well, arguing, desperate for answers. Their trust in him grows with every lie he tells. Yet that night, when he lies awake, the same wind that once comforted him begins to hiss through the cracks in his window. Murmurs too soft to catch, but too real to ignore. He tells himself it's just the wind, but his heart pounds like something guilty, trying to escape. Morning brings whispers among the villagers. Clara approaches Elias with tears in her eyes, saying her crops have turned gray overnight. Jonas looks broken, holding soil that slips through his fingers like dust. Elias fakes concern, promising hell help. But when he looks at his own field, thriving, golden, perfect, guilt flickers, quickly buried beneath pride. The more they suffer, the wealthier he becomes, and the whispers in his field grow louder, almost speaking his name. At the market, whispers of Elias's success spread like wildfire. He buys more land, smiling at the desperate faces of those who sell. Mara watches silently from her stall, her old eyes cold with knowing. The soil remembers, she mutters to no one. That night, Elias dreams of roots wrapping around his hands, pulling him into the ground. When he wakes, his nails are caked in dirt. The night turns unnaturally still. Elias walks his fields with a lantern, trying to silence his thoughts. The air feels heavy, as if listening. Then, a whisper. His own voice echoes softly from the rows of corn. There's a blight coming. He freezes, staring into the dark. The sound grows louder, repeating every lie he's ever told, until he drops the lantern. Flames catch the dry stalks, and the field glows with a golden, burning truth. He runs, but the voices follow, chanting his name through smoke and night. Dawn crawled across the smoke-stained fields, the scent of ash clinging to the air like guilt. Elias stood barefoot in the ruins, heart pounding, eyes hollow. The fire had devoured the western patch of his land, yet the whispers persisted. They hissed softly from the surviving stalks, calling him liar, thief, betrayer. When Clara and Jonas arrived, their faces pale in the early light, Elias told them it was vandals, strangers passing through. His voice trembled, but his lie was smooth. Still, Jonas' gaze lingered on him too long, like he could already hear what the crops were saying. In the following days, Elias's remaining fields began to grow faster than ever. The crops shimmered with impossible color, their husks gleaming gold under moonlight. Villagers whispered that he'd made a pact with something unholy. Elias laughed them off, yet he felt the truth gnawing beneath his ribs. Each night the voices grew clearer, whispering not to him, but through him. When he tried to sleep, he could hear his own words from weeks ago, repeated in the exact tone he'd used to deceive. The next morning, Clara came to his house trembling, her crops completely dead. "You promised to help," she cried, her voice breaking. Elias avoided her eyes, handing her a pouch of gold coins, saying softly, Take it. Move away." But his hands shook as he spoke. From the fields outside, faint laughter echoed, his own voice mocking. Clara stepped back, eyes wide, whispering, "What have you done?" The sound of her fear cut deeper than the whispers ever had. That evening, Elias found Mara waiting by his gate. The old woman's eyes glowed with a dim, knowing sorrow. "You fed the earth lies," she said softly. "Now it speaks in your voice." Elias shouted at her to leave, but her words clung to him like vines. As she turned away, she dropped a handful of seeds at his feet. They pulsed faintly, beating like tiny hearts. He crushed them in anger, but as he did, the ground beneath him seemed to sigh. The whispers swelled, filling the night air with his own deceitful laughter. By week's end, Elias no longer spoke to anyone. The village had grown distant, whispers spreading faster than truth. His reflection in the window began to move even when he stood still. When he listened closely, it mouthed his lies in silence, word for word. Terrified, he covered every mirror, but the whispers still came. At night, his fields shone gold against the black sky, and from within the wind, he heard a voice. His own calling, "Confess, or be devoured by what you planted." He pressed his hands over his ears, but the voices only laughed. The whispers no longer waited for night. They followed Elias into daylight, threading through his every breath. When he walked past the villagers, he could hear them repeating words he'd never spoken aloud. The words he'd lied in secret. The sound made him sick. He stopped going to the market, too afraid of what others might hear. His field rustled even when there was no wind. And sometimes, in the shimmering stalks, he saw shapes rising and falling, like something breathing beneath the soil. He began to wonder if the earth itself was alive with his deceit, feeding on every false promise he'd ever made. That night, Elias lit candles throughout his home, trying to drown out the voices. But when he opened his door, the fields shimmered gold under the moon, whispering his name again and again. "Elias. Liar. Elias!" He shouted at them, hurling rocks and curses, yet the whispers turned into laughter. His own laughter echoed in the dark. The crops seemed to sway closer, as if reaching for him. He stumbled back, tripping over the threshold, falling hard to the ground. For the first time, he realized he was no longer lying to others. He was lying to himself. By morning, Elias's face was pale and sunken. He could barely eat. When Jonas came to his door with concern, Elias refused to open it. "Leave me," he whispered through the wood. But Jonas, with kindness that cut like a blade, said, "I don't know what you've done, Elias, but something in your land isn't right." Elias almost confessed. He wanted to, but when he opened his mouth, the wind outside roared, and the whispering began again, louder, mocking him. Jonas stepped back, his eyes full of both pity and fear. Later that day, Elias wandered into the village well. He stared at his reflection in the water, only to see the face of a liar staring back, lips moving, though he was silent. "Blight," it mouthed. "You said it would ruin them all." Elias dropped to his knees, whispering apologies to the water, to the soil, to anything listening. But when he looked up, villagers were watching, whispering among themselves, afraid of what he'd become. His reflection smiled as he wept, its expression cruel and knowing. That evening, Clara came once more. "Tell the truth, Elias," she begged. "The land is dying. We are dying." But he couldn't. The words refused to leave his throat. Behind her, the fields rustled louder, whispering her name now, repeating it in his voice. Clara's face filled with horror as she turned toward the sound. The stalks seemed to breathe. Elias tried to speak, to warn her, but the ground beneath them began to tremble, and a single stalk broke free. Twisting like a hand toward him, in the still air, the truth he'd buried finally began to rise. Night returned heavy and breathless. Elias sat by his table, his lantern flickering as if afraid to burn. From outside came a sound like rustling cloth, the field breathing, whispering. Then came his own voice, whispering Clara's name again and again, followed by laughter, the same cruel tone he once used to deceive. He pressed his hands over his ears, but the sound seeped through, rising from the floorboards. His walls began to creak as if the house itself were listening. He whispered to the empty room, "I didn't mean it." But the voices replied in unison, "Yes, you did." Unable to bear it, Elias fled into the night. The moon glowed full and cold, painting his field silver. The crops moved with a will of their own, parting before him as he walked, whispering with each step. Liar, thief, betrayer. His breath came in short gasps. Then he saw them, faint shapes among the rows, outlines of faces he once deceived. Jonas, Clara, even Mara, their eyes hollow, their mouths moving silently. The wind turned harsh, carrying his every lie back to him, word for word. As Elias stumbled deeper into the fields, the whispers turned into words, not spoken, but breathed by the earth itself. He fell to his knees, pressing his hands to the soil. Beneath it, something moved. Roots twisted up around his fingers like veins, warm and pulsing. He tried to pull away, but they tightened, dragging him closer to the ground. He screamed as the voices rose, dozens of them, layered, crying, accusing. They weren't just his lies anymore. They were the lives ruined by them. Every voice had a face, every root a memory. When dawn crept over the horizon, Elias awoke on the ground, mud caked on his face and hands. The field was silent, too silent. He staggered back to the village, seeking someone, anyone, but every door was closed, every window shuttered. Word had spread. They believed he was cursed. As he walked past the well, he saw his reflection again. But this time, it was smiling. Its lips moved soundlessly before water rippled into waves. Elias turned away, trembling, realizing that even silence now spoke against him. That night, Elias returned to his field one last time. The crops whispered like 1,000 tongues, their sound now constant, suffocating. "Confess," they chanted. "Confess." He fell to his knees and screamed into the soil, begging for forgiveness, tearing at the dirt with bleeding hands. I lied to them all," he cried. The earth pulsed beneath him, opening slightly, a slow breath of wind escaping as though exhaling truth. Then the voices stilled. For the first time in weeks, only one voice remained, soft and trembling, whispering from deep below. "Now you know what it feels like to be buried alive in your own deceit." The next morning brought no bird's song, only the faint hum of the fields. Elias awoke inside his house, but something felt wrong. His hands were raw and dark, soil packed under every fingernail, as if the earth had followed him inside. His reflection in the window was gray, veins faintly golden beneath his skin. Outside, the wheat moved without wind, the stalks twisting toward his walls. The silence wasn't peace anymore. It was a warning. He felt the house breathe around him. Every lie he'd told hung heavy in the air, waiting. He tried to wash it off. The soil, the guilt, the voices. But the harder he scrubbed, the darker his skin turned. The water in the basin rippled and whispered, echoing the word, liar. Elias stumbled backward, clutching his chest as whispers filled the room. He shouted, "I told the truth in the end." But the house groaned in protest. The boards beneath his feet cracked open slightly, and from between them sprouted thin, golden roots that coiled around his ankles like chains. He fell, gasping, unable to break free. Hours passed. The whispers outside rose and fell like waves, and through the window Elias saw villagers gathered at the edge of his land, Clara among them, her face pale with sorrow. "He's paying for his sins," Jonas murmured beside her. None dared step closer. Elias, weak and half buried in roots, lifted his head toward the window, eyes glistening with tears. He tried to speak, to ask for help, but when he opened his mouth, soil spilled out instead of words. The villagers stepped back in horror as the house itself began to groan, the earth reclaiming what it had lent. By nightfall, the whispers grew into a single deep voice, one that seemed to rise from beneath the roots of the earth itself. What you sowed was not grain, it said, but greed. Elias screamed as the floor split apart, golden stalks rising around him, wrapping tighter and tighter until only his eyes were visible, glowing faintly through the soil. The crops outside bent low as though bowing in reverence or mourning. When the wind finally stopped, the field was silent once more, and where Elias had stood, a tall, golden stalk swayed gently, whispering still. Days later, when the storm had passed, Claire returned alone. The field glowed softly under a calm morning sun. In the place where Elias's house once stood, a single stalk towered above the rest, its husk heavy and golden, whispering faintly in his voice. I lied. Clara knelt beside it, tears slipping down her cheeks. She whispered, May the truth feed what you've sown. The wind stirred gently, and for the first time the whispers faded into silence. From that day on, no one in Greenvale lied again, for every rustle of wheat reminded them. The earth never forgets. The wind in Greenvale turned gentle again, as though weary from all it had spoken. Weeks passed since Elias vanished into the soil, and the villagers whispered of him only in hushed tones. Some said the earth took him. Others claimed he still breathed beneath the golden stalks. The fields had grown unnaturally fertile, yet none dared harvest them. Clara, now tending her own small patch of honest soil, often paused to listen. The silence was not empty. It was a warning. Every seed sown in deceit still echoed faintly underfoot, like a heart that refused to stop beating. Jonas gathered the remaining villagers by the well, his voice low. The land gave us a lesson, he said. Greed feeds the earth poison. No one argued. They repaired fences, shared tools, worked shoulder to shoulder, as they once did before Elias's lies divided them. But every now and then, when the wind picked up, they all paused, listening. Somewhere in the distance, the crop still rustled with a voice too familiar, too mournful to ignore. Truth, it seemed, had chosen to stay. At dusk, Clara walked alone toward the edge of Elias's field. The air was heavy, golden light melting into amber. She knelt and brushed her fingers against the soil, half expecting it to tremble. You could have told the truth, she whispered. For a moment, the wheat swayed, forming a small circle around her. In the center, the tallest stalk bent toward her, as if bowing. Clara closed her eyes, not in fear but forgiveness. The whisper that came was soft. Thank you. Then the field stilled, and the air grew quiet once more. That night, Jonas dreamed of Elias. He saw him standing among endless fields of gold, smiling. Not with pride, but peace. The truth set me free, Elias whispered before fading into the wind. Jonas awoke to find the air outside still and fragrant, the field swaying softly as if the land itself had forgiven. For the first time in many seasons, he felt no guilt, no fear, only the weight of lessons learned. Lies may bloom fast, but truth roots deeper. When dawn broke again, the people of Greenvale began planting once more. They shared seeds, shared labor, shared truth. The soil seemed lighter now, richer, as if it remembered honesty. Clara stood at the edge of the field, eyes closed, breathing in the scent of earth. Somewhere deep beneath, the last whisper of Elias's voice lingered. Let truth be your harvest. The wind carried it away gently, and with it, the story of a man who learned too late that the earth always speaks back. Years passed, and Greenvale flourished. Children now played where Elias's farmhouse once stood, unaware of the man buried beneath their laughter. Yet the older ones remembered, and they told the tale whenever greed returned to a heart. The land no longer whispered in fear. It hummed softly, as if singing of lessons learned. Sometimes on still nights, Clara would stand by the field and swear she could hear the faint murmur of Elias's voice carried by the wheat. Not crying, not warning, but simply repeating one word: truth. One evening, as the village gathered for harvest, Jonas raised his glass and said, "Let this land remind us, nothing planted in lies can ever grow right." The villagers cheered softly, but Clara's eyes drifted toward the glowing field. No detour. She saw a single tall stalk among the rest, its hue brighter, almost golden white. For a heartbeat, she thought it bent toward them, nodding in approval. She smiled, not out of fear, but gratitude. In that quiet moment, she knew Elias had found his peace in the soil he once betrayed. When the festival ended, Clara walked alone under the starlit sky. The path led her back to the field's edge. The air was cool, the earth still warm beneath her bare feet. She whispered into the dark, "You are more than your greed, Elias." A gentle breeze stirred, circling her like a sigh. The wheat swayed in slow rhythm, almost human, almost kind. The field shimmered faintly gold before falling still. For the first time since his fall, she felt peace, the kind that grows only when truth has finally taken root. In the years that followed, Greenvale became known for its pure harvest. Travelers spoke of crops that never spoiled, and of farmers who never lied. Children grew up hearing the tale of the man who deceived the earth and was claimed by it. Some said the story was legend. Others swore they'd heard the field whisper when the wind blew just right. But one truth remained. Every seed planted carried his memory, a promise that honesty feeds life, while lies feed only silence. At the edge of Greenvale, the lone golden stalk still stands. On quiet nights when the moon is high, the wind carries a faint voice, not haunting but humble, whispering the lesson that built the village anew. What you sow in deceit, you reap in sorrow, but what you plant in truth will live forever. The villagers never cut that stalk. They call it the whisper of the earth. And whenever someone in Greenvale feels temptation rise, they walk there, listen to the wind, and remember the farmer whose lies taught them to live in truth.